HR said my PTSD made me a risk at work. 3 months later, my therapy dog had a better office than they did, and they were the ones who were seen as the risk. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about how the quietest people often have the most to say, and how the wounds you can't see are the ones that can make you stronger than anyone imagines. My name is Alex, and this is how I dismantled two people's careers, piece by piece, using nothing but their own greed and the silent loyalty of my best friend. It all started on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were my good days. The ghosts from my time in the service were usually quieter on Tuesdays. I worked as a data analyst for a mid-sized tech firm called Innovatech. It was the perfect job for someone like me. Quiet, predictable, and focused. I could put on my headphones, stare at spreadsheets, and find the patterns in the noise. It was calming. It was my slice of normal after years of chaos. My partner in this quiet life was Buddy, my golden retriever. He wasn't just a pet, he was a medical necessity. A certified therapy dog who knew my triggers better than I did. If my breathing got shallow, his head would be in my lap. If my legs started to shake under the desk, his warm weight would press against it until it stopped. He was a silent, furry guardian, and he came to work with me every single day. The company had approved it as a reasonable accommodation under the ADA. For a while it worked perfectly. Buddy would sleep under my desk, and I would crunch numbers. We were a good team. The incident that changed everything was small. A fire alarm test. No one had told me it was scheduled. The sudden piercing shriek sent a jolt of pure ice through my veins. My heart hammered against my ribs. My vision tunneled. I wasn't in an office in Ohio anymore. I was back there in the dust and the heat, the air thick with smoke and screams. I didn't lose control. I didn't shout. I just froze. My hands gripped the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles turned white. Buddy was instantly alert. He pushed his head hard into my chest, whining softly, grounding me. I focused on his fur, on the rhythm of his breathing. In a minute, maybe two, the worst of it passed. I was shaky, but I was back. I took a short walk with Buddy, got some water, and went back to my desk. No one seemed to have even noticed, or so I thought. The next morning I got the email. Meeting request follow-up. It was from Karen, the head of HR. My stomach twisted. I knew this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. I walked into her sterile gray office with Buddy at my side. My boss Mark was already there, looking uncomfortable and avoiding my eyes. That was the first red flag. Mark was a decent guy, I'd thought. A little weak maybe, but not malicious. Karen, on the other hand, was all sharp angles and a smile that never reached her eyes. She gestured for me to sit. "Alex," she began, her voice dripping with false concern. "Mark and I wanted to check in. We heard about the episode you had yesterday during the alarm test." Episode. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. I kept my voice steady. "It was a panic attack, Karen. The alarm was unexpected. I handled it, and I was back to work in 15 minutes. She scribbled something on a notepad. "Yes, handled it, but the fact is it happened. Mark and I have been discussing the situation, and we have some concerns. You see, from the company's perspective, your condition, your PTSD, it presents a certain level of risk." Risk. There it was. The word they use to strip you of your humanity and turn you into a line item on a liability assessment. Mark finally spoke, still not looking at me. "We just want to make sure the work environment is safe and predictable for everyone." For everyone but me, he meant. Karen leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "What if something bigger happens, Alex? A real emergency? What if a major project is on the line and you have another episode? You're a data analyst. We need our analysts to be sharp, focused, and reliable. Your condition, by its very nature, is unpredictable. You're a liability." I felt a cold rage building inside me, a quiet, focused anger that was far more dangerous than any panic attack. They weren't concerned about me. They were concerned about their own comfort. They saw my invisible wound, not as a part of me, but as a problem for them. I looked at Buddy, who was sitting perfectly by my chair, his gaze fixed on me. He was calm, a steady presence in a room full of poison. "My performance has been excellent," I said, my voice low. "I've never missed a deadline. My work is accurate, My PTSD doesn't affect my ability to do my job. Buddy helps me manage the symptoms. Karen smiled that empty smile again. The dog, yes, well, we've been accommodating. But that doesn't change the underlying risk. We're putting you on a formal performance improvement plan. Any further incidents, any sign of instability, and we'll have to reevaluate your position here at Innovate Tech. A performance plan. For a medical condition, it was a thinly veiled threat. They were building a paper trail to get rid of me. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. I understand, I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. I turned and walked out, Buddy trotting faithfully beside me. Back at my desk, the anger solidified into something else: resolve. They thought I was a risk. They thought I was broken. Fine. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I wasn't just a soldier who got hurt. I was a soldier who was trained to observe, to strategize, to survive. And I would survive this. More than that, I would win. The first step was small, almost petty, but it was about establishing a new set of rules. Their rules were about power and intimidation. My rules would be about procedure and the law. I spent the entire weekend not stewing in my anger, but channeling it. I read every line of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I studied every page of the Innovate Tech Employee Handbook, especially the sections on accommodations and office space allocation. I cross-referenced it with state laws. My plan began to form, elegant in its simplicity. On Monday morning, I sent a new email to Karen, with Mark CC'd. Subject: formal request for accommodation modification. The email was polite, professional, and full of legal jargon I'd carefully learned. I stated that for my service animal, Buddy, to be fully effective, he required a designated quiet space, free from excessive foot traffic and auditory stimulation, as recommended by my therapist and his trainer. A standard cubicle environment, I argued, could diminish his ability to detect the subtle physiological changes that precede a PTSD response. I didn't ask for an office for myself. I asked for one for my dog. I cited specific company policies about utilizing unused office spaces, and ADA guidelines on ensuring accommodations are effective. I attached a letter from my therapist. I documented everything. I knew what they would think. They'd see it as a nuisance, another problem from the unstable employee. But I also knew they'd be afraid of the legal implications of saying no. Denying a documented request for an accommodation is a lawsuit waiting to happen. 2 days later, Karen called me into her office again. The fake smile was gone, replaced by a tight, annoyed line. "Alex, this request is highly unusual," she said. "Is it?" I replied calmly. "It seems to be in line with company policy and federal law. I'm just trying to ensure my approved accommodation is as effective as possible, so I can continue to meet and exceed my performance expectations." I used their own corporate language against them. She hated it. I could see it in the clenching of her jaw. She and Mark had to scramble. There was one empty office on our floor. It was small, a former storage closet they'd converted years ago, but it had a door and a small window that looked out over the parking lot. It was considered the worst office on the floor. No one wanted it, except me, or rather Buddy. They gave it to him. The next day I moved my things. I put Buddy's orthopedic bed in the corner by the window. I put his water bowl by the door. I brought in a small filing cabinet for my own work, and my laptop. It was my office now. But on paper officially, it was Canine Assistant Accommodation Space 3B. And here's the beautiful part. Karen, the head of HR, worked in an open-plan cubicle farm like everyone else. It was noisy and she had no privacy. My dog's new office was quiet, had a door I could close, and a window with a view. My therapy dog officially had a better office than the head of HR. Word got around the office. People would walk by and see me working peacefully in my new space, with Buddy napping in the sunbeam from the window. They didn't know the whole story, but they knew I'd somehow gotten a private office, and they knew it was because of my dog. It was a small, delicious victory. I could feel Karen's eyes on me every time I walked to the coffee machine. It was a constant, visible reminder that I had outplayed her. But I knew this was just the first move on the chessboard. She and Mark hadn't given up. They were just waiting for me to make a mistake. The performance plan still hung over my head. They were watching my every move, scrutinizing my work, waiting for any excuse to get rid of me. The thing is, when you live with PTSD, you become an expert observer of your environment. You have to be. You learn to notice the little things, a change in tone, a shift in posture, a detail that's out of place. It's a survival mechanism. And as I sat in my new quiet office, I started applying that survival mechanism to Innovatech itself. I started noticing things about Karen and Mark. They had lunch together almost every day, always heading off-site. They held closed-door meetings that ran late into the evening. Mark, who was always stressed about departmental budgets, seemed to be signing off on an awful lot of invoices from new vendors I'd never heard of, particularly one called Logistics Solutions Group. My job was data analysis. My job was to find the signal in the noise, so I started looking, on my own time of course, using my own laptop at home. I started with public records. Logistics Solutions Group was a registered LLC. The registration address was a P.O. box in a town an hour away. There was no website, no phone number, no digital footprint at all. Strange for a tech vendor. Then I dug into the company's internal servers. I had access to a lot of financial data as part of my job. Not everything, but enough. I pulled all the invoices from Logistics Solutions Group. They were for strategic consulting services. The descriptions were vague. The amounts were always just under the $10,000 threshold that required an executive vice president's signature. Mark's signature was on every single one. And the final approval, before it went to accounts payable, that was Karen, as head of HR, signing off on the contractual necessity of the service. An HR head approving tech consulting invoices was not just unusual, it was a massive red flag. I felt a familiar thrill, the same one I used to get before a mission. It was the thrill of the hunt. I kept digging. I cross-referenced payment dates with their social media. I would never normally look at a co-worker's social media, but this was different. This was an investigation. Karen's profile was private, but Mark's was wide open. He wasn't a sophisticated criminal. 2 days after a $9,500 payment went to Logistics Solutions Group, Mark posted a photo of a brand new jet ski. Tagline: "Living the dream." A month later, another payment went out. A week after that, Mark posted pictures from a surprise weekend trip to Las Vegas, with his wife staying in a suite that cost more than my monthly rent. And then I found the key. I was looking through old incorporation documents for Logistics Solutions Group, something you can access through the Secretary of State's website for a small fee. I was looking for a name, any name, and I found one. The registered agent for the LLC wasn't Karen or Mark. It was a woman named Susan Pritchard. The name was familiar. I ran it through the Innovatech employee database. No hits. I tried a wider search, and there it was. Susan Pritchard, Karen's maiden name. Logistics Solutions Group was her. It was a shell company. She and Mark were writing phony invoices for consulting. Mark would approve them, and Karen would give the final sign-off, funneling company money directly into her own pocket. Mark was getting kickbacks to fund his little luxuries. They weren't just bullies, they were thieves, and I had them. I compiled everything into a secure encrypted file. The invoices, the payment records, the screenshots of Mark's bragging posts, the LLC registration with Karen's maiden name. It was a perfect undeniable case. Now came the hard part. What to do with it? I could go to the CEO, but what if he was in on it? Or what if he decided to sweep it under the rug to avoid a scandal, and just fire them quietly? That wasn't enough. They didn't just try to fire me, they tried to break me. They used my trauma, my wound, as a weapon against me. They deserved more than just losing their jobs. They deserved to feel what I felt, that cold stomach-dropping fear of being exposed and powerless. I needed to set a trap, and I knew just how to do it. My performance improvement plan was my weapon. I was supposed to have a 60-day review with Karen and Mark. It was coming up next week. They were expecting to come in and tell me I was still a risk, that I hadn't shown sufficient improvement in my so-called instability. They were going to use that meeting to finally push me out. They had no idea I was about to bring a cannon to their knife fight. The day before the meeting, I put the final phase of my plan into motion. I used an anonymous email service to send a single cryptic message to Innovatech's general counsel, a man I knew to be a stickler for rules. The email said only this: ask Mark and Karen about the invoices from Logistics Solutions Group. An anonymous tip is being sent to the state attorney's office next week. I didn't send them the proof. I just planted the seed of fear. I knew the general counsel would immediately, and quietly, start asking questions. And I knew that when he did, Karen and Mark would panic. Panicked people make mistakes. The next morning the air in the office was thick with tension. I saw the general counsel walk into Mark's office and close the door. 20 minutes later, he walked out, his face like stone. Then he went to Karen's cubicle. Their conversation was short and quiet. I watched them for the rest of the day from the safety of my little office. Karen was a mess. She was making frantic phone calls, her voice a harsh whisper. Mark looked like he was going to be sick. He kept wiping sweat from his forehead. They thought a real investigation was coming. They thought they were about to be caught. And in their panic, they did exactly what I hoped they would do. They decided to accelerate their plan to get rid of me. They needed a scapegoat, someone to distract from their own crimes. And who better than the unstable employee with the PTSD? Late that afternoon, I got an updated meeting invitation. The subject line was no longer performance review. It was now urgent, meeting regarding your employment. They were moving in for the kill. The next day I walked into that same sterile HR office. It felt different this time. I wasn't the one who was afraid. I walked in with Buddy at my side, my heart rate as calm and steady as a sleeping giant. I sat down, and Buddy laid his head on my foot, a silent gesture of support. Karen and Mark were sitting across from me. They looked terrible. Their faces were pale and drawn, but they were trying to project an air of authority. It was a pathetic performance. Alex, Karen started, her voice shaking slightly despite her efforts. We have to let you go. This is your final day at Innovatech. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her, waiting. Mark cleared his throat. There's been a serious security breach, he said, reading from a script on his desk. Confidential financial data has been accessed from an unauthorized IP address. We've traced the breach back. We've traced it to your remote login credentials. He couldn't even look at me as he said it. Karen picked it up. Given your history, and your clear dissatisfaction with the company, demonstrated by your unusual demands for an office, we have to assume you are the source of this leak. Your behavior has been erratic. We believe you represent a deliberate threat to this company's security. It was almost brilliant in its cruelty. They were trying to frame me, using the very risk they had invented as the motive for a crime I didn't commit. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. I watched the fear and desperation flicker in their eyes. They thought they had me. They thought this was the end. Then I smiled. A real smile. And I spoke, my voice calm and low. A data leak? That's fascinating, I said, because I've also been looking into some financial irregularities. I thought maybe we could discuss my findings. I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim black binder. I placed it on the table with a soft, definitive thud. Buddy lifted his head, as if on cue, and let out a soft woof. Karen and Mark stared at the binder as if it were a venomous snake. Let's start with a company called Logistics Solutions Group, I said, flipping open the first page. I turned it around for them to see. It was a copy of an invoice, signed by Mark, approved by Karen. I have copies of every invoice you've submitted for the last 2 years, totaling, let me see. I pretended to check my notes. A little over $200,000 for consulting services that don't seem to exist. Mark went white as a sheet. Karen's jaw went slack. And then there's the company registration. I continued, flipping to the next page. Logistics Solutions Group, registered to a one Susan Pritchard. That's your maiden name, isn't it, Karen? Karen made a small choking sound. And Mark, I said, turning my gaze to him. He was visibly trembling now. You must be a very savvy investor. A brand new jet ski, lovely trips to Vegas, all on a department manager's salary. It's impressive. I have the receipts, so to speak. Your public Instagram is a real goldmine of evidence. I closed the binder, So let's talk about security risks. Let's talk about who is a liability to innovate tech. Is it the guy who had a panic attack once? Or is it the two executives who have been systematically stealing from the company for 2 years, and are now trying to frame a decorated veteran to cover their tracks? The room was utterly silent, except for the sound of Buddy's gentle breathing. The power had shifted so completely it was almost a physical force. They were broken. All their bluster, their authority, their petty cruelty, had evaporated, leaving behind two terrified, guilty people. Karen was the first to crack. "What do you want?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "What I want is justice," I said, my voice cold as steel. "But I'm a reasonable man. So here is what's going to happen. You have 2 documents in front of you. Your resignation letters. I took the liberty of typing them up for you. You will sign them. They will state you are leaving for personal reasons, effective immediately. Second," I continued, "this binder, and the fully encrypted digital copy will remain with me. If you sign those letters and disappear from my life forever, it will stay with me. If you don't, a copy goes to the CEO, the board of directors, and the district attorney's office. Your choice. Third, the company will be providing me with a formal written apology for the discrimination and harassment I have endured. My record will be wiped clean of this ridiculous performance plan, and they will provide me with a severance package, a generous one. For the emotional distress, I have a number in mind. I think they will find it very reasonable, considering the alternative is a massive lawsuit and a public scandal." I paused, letting it all sink in. Then I added the final touch. "Oh, and one more thing," I said, looking around the small gray office. "This office, and the one I'm in, they are to be officially designated as wellness rooms, available for any employee who needs a quiet moment. A small legacy." Mark grabbed a pen with a shaking hand and signed his letter without a word. Karen stared at me, her eyes filled with a venomous hatred. But she was beaten. She knew it. She signed her name, her hand moving like a broken machine. I stood up. I took the letters, put them in my binder, and snapped it shut. "It's been a pleasure working with you," I said, the irony tasting sweet. I turned and walked to the door, Buddy right with me. I didn't look back. The aftermath was quiet. Karen and Mark were gone the next day. An all-staff email went out announcing their sudden resignations. The company's lawyers contacted me within hours. They agreed to every single one of my terms without negotiation. The severance was more than generous. The letter of apology was deeply satisfying to read. I didn't stay at Innovatech. I took my package and my clean record, and I walked away. There was no joy in staying in a place with so many bad memories. My revenge was complete. But it wasn't about the money or getting them fired. It was about taking back the narrative. They tried to define me by my trauma, to label me as a risk. But they were the ones who were weak, who were driven by greed and fear. My wounds, the very things they saw as a liability, had given me the focus, the discipline, and the quiet resolve to see them for who they really were. Today life is good. Buddy and I spend a lot of time by the lake. It's quiet here. The ghosts are mostly gone. I learned something through all of this. Sometimes, the world will try to tell you that you're broken. It will try to make you feel small because of the battles you fought. But those battles don't make you a risk. They make you a survivor. And survivors know how to fight back. They just pick their battles and they always win. Thank you for listening to my story. It's important for people to know that you don't have to accept the labels others put on you. If you've ever felt underestimated or misunderstood, I hope my experience gives you a little bit of strength. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, leave a comment down below to share your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, don't hesitate to share the video. It can make a world of difference. Thanks again for watching.